Have you ever noticed how the world seems to react strangely when you share a deeper truth? How people look away, change the subject, or simply walk away when you mention something that goes beyond the surface of empty conversations? Perhaps you've noticed that your most sincere reflections are met with discomfort, as if you've touched on something no one wants to acknowledge. There is a peculiar feeling of isolation that arises when you realize that your way of seeing the world does not fit the molds accepted by the majority. It is as if you were a stranger in your own land, speaking a language that few understand or want to understand. Franz Kafka masterfully captured this experience by observing how those who are truly awake do not disappear from the world, but retreat into the shadows, protecting their clarity from an environment that cannot bear to be confronted with the naked truth. You're not crazy, you're not alone, and you're definitely not wrong to feel that you need to hide your light in order to survive amid the collective darkness. If you have been feeling this way, if you recognize this experience of having to hide your true nature so as not to upset others, then you have found your place. This channel is dedicated to people like you, who feel deeply, who question beyond the surface, and who often feel misunderstood in a world that prefers comfortable illusions to transformative reality. Here you won't have to pretend to be less than you are. You won't have to dim your light so as not to outshine anyone else. By subscribing, you join a community of genuine seekers, people who understand that awakening is not a final destination, but a journey of constant courage. Each video is created with you in mind, who feels different, who carries questions that others avoid asking, who needs a safe space to explore the mysteries of existence without judgment. And if this content resonates with your soul, leave your like, not only to support the channel, but so that other awakened hearts can find this refuge of understanding amid the vast sea of superficial content that floods our digital reality. The condition of awakening in modern society represents one of the most fascinating and disturbing phenomena of contemporary human experience. Kafka, in his literary genius, understood that the transformation of consciousness is not a process celebrated by the collective, but something that generates discomfort, resistance, and even hostility from those who remain trapped in conventional thought structures. The individual who awakens to deeper truths about the nature of reality, about the artificiality of many social constructs, about the emptiness of most human occupations, finds himself in an extraordinarily delicate position. They can no longer fully participate in the superficial conversations that dominate the social fabric, can no longer get excited about empty entertainment, can no longer bear the social masks they once wore without question. This internal transformation creates a kind of voluntary exile, a gradual distancing from spaces where unconsciousness is not only accepted but required. Genuine awakening implies a fundamental change in the perception of reality, such a profound alteration in the way of processing existence that a return to the previous state becomes impossible. It is as if the person had tasted a knowledge that permanently alters the flavor of everything else. Activities that once provided satisfaction now seem hollow. Concerns that once consumed energy prove trivial. Relationships based on superficiality become unsustainable. The world, in turn, reacts to this transformation with a mixture of mistrust, incomprehension, and even defensive aggression. Society has its mechanisms of self-preservation, and one of them is the rejection of anything that threatens to question its foundations. When someone awakens to certain truths about the illusory nature of many social structures, about the artificiality of much of what we consider progress, about the spiritual emptiness that characterizes much of modern civilization, that person automatically becomes an uncomfortable mirror for those who still live unaware of these realities. People's natural reaction is to turn away from this mirror, avoiding contact with anything that might raise uncomfortable questions about their own lives. It is easier to label awakening as madness, eccentricity, or arrogance than to recognize that there may be something genuine in this different perception of reality. Thus, those who are truly awakened learn, out of a need for emotional and social survival, to hide their light, to modulate their truth, to speak only when they find ears ready to receive their words. Have you ever felt this need to hide, to dim your light so as not to upset others? Have you noticed how your deepest truths are received with discomfort or incomprehension? If you are going through this experience now, if you recognize this feeling of having to be less than you really are in order to fit into the world, leave a comment. I also hide in order to survive. Your courage in sharing this may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today, to feel less alone on this journey of awakening. Sometimes, knowing that we are not alone is the first step in finding our true tribe. Kafka deeply understood this dynamic when portraying characters who find themselves in absurd, incomprehensible situations, where the rules of the game are never clearly explained, but where failure to comply with these implicit rules results in exclusion or punishment. His protagonists often experience a transformation that puts them in conflict with the world around them, not by deliberate choice, but because of a fundamental change in their nature that makes them incompatible with social expectations. This is exactly what happens with genuine spiritual awakening. The process of awakening is not a conscious choice in the traditional sense of the word. No one wakes up one day and decides, "Today I am going to awaken spiritually." But it is something that happens gradually, through experiences that accumulate questions, through observations that undermine previous certainties, through a growing sensitivity that captures aspects of reality that were previously invisible. It is an organic process, inevitable once it begins, that transforms a person from the inside out. This transformation creates a kind of temporal and existential mismatch with the rest of society. While most people continue to operate within conventional paradigms, concerned with issues that awakening has revealed to be secondary or even illusory, the awakened individual finds themselves in a state of expanded consciousness that makes them simultaneously more sensitive to truth and more vulnerable to the suffering that this sensitivity entails. Modern society, with its emphasis on materialism, consumerism, competitiveness, and superficial relationships, offers little space for those who have awakened to deeper values. Awakening often reveals the futility of many of the concerns that dominate social life. The obsessive pursuit of status, the unbridled accumulation of material goods, the compulsive need for external approval, participation in social dynamics based on comparison and competition. When a person awakens to the realization that genuine happiness does not come from these external sources, that inner peace does not depend on material achievements, that the meaning of life is linked to much more subtle and profound aspects of existence, they automatically find themselves out of step with the dominant priorities of their culture. This misalignment creates a sense of isolation that can be deeply painful. Awakening also reveals the extent of collective unconsciousness, the way most people live in a kind of spiritual somnambulism, repeating patterns without question, absorbing beliefs without critical reflection, participating in systems that perpetuate suffering without realizing their complicity. This perception can generate a feeling of overwhelming existential loneliness, as the awakened individual feels surrounded by people who seem to live in a completely different reality. The natural temptation would be to try to awaken others, to share these insights, to enlighten those who still live in the darkness of unconsciousness. However, experience quickly teaches that this kind of spiritual evangelism is not only ineffective, but can be counterproductive. People do not awaken because they are forced or persuaded. They awaken when they are ready, when their own experience leads them to the necessary questions, when the pain of unconsciousness becomes greater than the fear of transformation. Thus, the awakened learn the delicate art of sacred concealment. They develop a wisdom that Kafka masterfully portrayed, the understanding that their truth, while valid and transformative, can be too disturbing to share indiscriminately. They learn to read people, to perceive who is ready for deeper conversations, who can withstand questions about the nature of reality, who is open enough to consider perspectives that challenge common sense. This selection process is not elitism or arrogance. It is mutual protection. It protects the awakening from misunderstanding and attack by those who are not ready to receive it, and it protects others from confrontations with truths for which they have not yet developed adequate internal resources to process. It is an act of compassion disguised as social withdrawal. The life of awakening in an unconscious society develops peculiar characteristics. There is a chameleon-like quality that develops, an ability to adapt language, behavior, even seemingly beliefs to the immediate social environment. This is not falsehood or hypocrisy, but a refined social intelligence that understands that truth has its appropriate moments and its appropriate audiences. There is also a particular loneliness that accompanies this condition. It is not just the loneliness of not having company, but the deeper loneliness of not being understood in your essence, of having to constantly modulate your authentic expression to adapt to the limitations of understanding in your social environment. It is the loneliness of carrying perceptions that cannot be easily shared, of living rich and complex inner realities that remain largely invisible to the outside world. However, this loneliness also contains the seeds of extraordinary freedom. When a person accepts that their journey of awakening can be largely solitary, when they reconcile themselves to the idea that their truth may not find immediate resonance in the world around them, something interesting happens. They free themselves from the need for external validation, from the compulsion to convince others, from dependence on social approval for their inner peace. This freedom allows for even greater depth in the awakening process. Without the distraction of trying to fit in or awaken others, the individual can devote their energy entirely to refining their own understanding, cultivating their own inner peace, and developing their own wisdom. Paradoxically, it is often at this stage of apparent isolation that awakening matures most significantly. The concealment of the awakened also serves a broader evolutionary function. In times of great collective unconsciousness, the presence of awakened individuals, even if hidden, keeps alive the possibility of transformation. They are like dormant seeds in soil that is not yet fertile, preserving evolutionary potentials that may germinate when conditions become more favorable. Their apparent invisibility is, in fact, a form of silent resistance, a preservation of alternative possibilities of being and living. Kafka brilliantly portrayed this condition in his narratives about characters who live realities parallel to accepted normality, operating according to logics different from those that govern the conventional social world. His protagonists often discover that their perceptions of reality, although valid for them, are incompatible with the expectations and understandings of the world around them. This incompatibility is not resolved through a triumph of truth over illusion, but through a tense coexistence where truth learns to live in the shadows. The condition of hidden awakening also develops a keen sensitivity to recognize others who are awake. There is a kind of internal radar that activates in the presence of similar consciousnesses, an ability to perceive beyond social masks and identify those who share similar perceptions about the nature of reality. These encounters, although rare, can be deeply nourishing, offering precious moments of mutual understanding and existential validation. When two or more awakened individuals meet, there is often a quality of communication that transcends conventional words. There is a silent recognition, an understanding that flows through glances, pauses, nuances that would be imperceptible to less sensitive observers. These connections, while precious, also reveal by contrast the degree of isolation that characterizes everyday interactions with the unconscious world. The hidden awakening also develops a particular relationship with time. While society operates at an accelerated pace, always chasing the next goal, the next achievement, the next entertainment, the awakening cultivates a quality of presence that is outside this temporal race. There is an understanding that the natural rhythms of inner transformation are slow, organic, and cannot be rushed by anxiety or spiritual ambition. This difference in pace creates another aspect of isolation: the difficulty of fully participating in the collective urgency that characterizes modern life. While others agonize over deadlines, goals, and social pressures, awakening has developed a broader perspective that relativizes these urgencies, often revealing them as artificial constructs that serve more to keep people busy and unaware than to generate real value. The wisdom of concealment also teaches about the cyclical nature of collective awakening processes. There are moments in history when expanded consciousness finds greater receptivity, periods of crisis or transition where old certainties are questioned and there is openness to new possibilities of understanding. At such times, the awakened can emerge from their concealment and contribute more directly to collective transformation. However, there are also periods of greater resistance, where the forces of unconsciousness organize defensively to maintain the status quo, where any profound questioning is seen as a threat to the established order. In these periods, the wisdom of concealment becomes even more relevant, protecting not only individual awakened beings, but also preserving the possibilities for transformation for more propitious moments. The occult awakening also develops a particular form of compassion. It is not the compassion that tries to save or convert, but the compassion that understands and accepts the different stages of conscious evolution. There is a recognition that each person is exactly where they need to be on their journey, that awakening cannot be forced or accelerated through external interventions, that unconsciousness also serves evolutionary purposes that are not always immediately understandable. This mature compassion allows awakened individuals to live amid unconsciousness without bitterness or resentment, keeping their hearts open even in the face of misunderstanding, preserving hope even when surrounded by apparent collective blindness. It is a form of love that does not depend on reciprocity or understanding, flowing regardless of whether it is recognized or valued. The experience of living as a hidden awakened one also teaches about the paradoxical nature of spiritual truth. The deeper the understanding becomes, the more difficult it is to communicate it in conventional words. The most important truths often transcend ordinary language, requiring symbols, metaphors, and direct experiences that cannot be conveyed through rational explanations. This limitation of communication contributes to isolation, but it also points to dimensions of experience that are beyond the conceptual mind. Silence gradually becomes a form of eloquence superior to words. There is a quality of presence that communicates more deeply than speeches, a way of being that teaches more effectively through example than through direct instruction. The awakened learn to trust this subtle form of influence, understanding that their mere conscious presence in the world is already a significant contribution, even if imperceptible to most. This understanding frees them from the compulsive need to do, to act, to actively transform the outside world. There is a recognition that the most important work is internal, that the transformation of the world begins with the transformation of individual consciousness, that outer peace is impossible without inner peace. This perspective may seem passive to superficial observers, but it is actually deeply active at more subtle levels of reality. The hidden awakening also develops a special relationship with solitude. Far from being merely a painful absence of company, solitude becomes a sacred space for communion with deeper aspects of existence. It is in solitude that awakening can completely shed social masks, explore the more subtle dimensions of consciousness without constraint, and cultivate genuine intimacy with oneself and the mystery of existence. This sacred solitude nurtures a form of fulfillment that is independent of external circumstances. There is a gradual discovery that completeness does not depend on relationships, achievements, or social recognition, but on a deep connection with one's own essence. This discovery is both liberating and challenging, as it removes many of the conventional motivations that drive social life, requiring the development of an entirely new framework of meaning. Life as hidden awakening also teaches about the impermanence of all existential conditions. There is an understanding that even isolation is temporary, that seasons of consciousness alternate, that periods of concealment can be followed by moments of greater visibility and connection. This impermanent perspective prevents both attachment to the condition of isolation and despair over the lack of external understanding. There is a quality of active waiting that characterizes this condition, a patience that is not passive but deeply confident in the greater rhythms of conscious evolution. It is the patience of those who understand that their time of greatest external contribution may not yet have arrived, that the period of apparent concealment is actually preparation for future forms of service and expression. Franz Kafk, in his literary genius, captured not only the individual experience of isolated awakening, but also its collective and historical dimension. His writings reveal how entire societies can be organized in ways that make genuine awakening not only difficult, but seemingly impossible. His narratives show how social systems can create labyrinths of unconsciousness so complex that finding a way out requires not only individual courage, but a form of intelligence that transcends conventional patterns of thought. Kafka's work suggests that the concealment of awakening is not only a strategy for personal survival, but a natural response to social environments that are structurally hostile to expanded consciousness. When social institutions themselves are built on foundations of unconsciousness, when educational, economic, political, and religious systems operate in ways that discourage deep questioning and individual authenticity, awakening naturally seeks refuge on the margins, in the interstitial spaces where it can grow without being immediately stifled. This systemic understanding of the concealment of awakening reveals that it is not a pathological phenomenon or a neurotic personal choice, but rather an intelligent and adaptive response to specific environmental conditions. Just as certain plants only flourish in very particular conditions of soil, light, and humidity, genuine awakening requires cultural and social conditions that allow for its natural development. Awareness of this systemic dynamic can be both discouraging and liberating. Discouraging because it reveals the extent of the challenges faced by anyone seeking to live more consciously and authentically. Liberating because it removes the personal guilt and self-judgment that often accompany the feeling of not being able to fully fit into the conventional social world. Recognizing that concealment is a natural and intelligent response to unsuitable environmental conditions allows the awakened to embrace their condition with greater acceptance and less resistance. There is nothing wrong with not being able to get excited about empty entertainment. There is no pathology in feeling uncomfortable with superficial conversations. There is no defect in preferring reflective solitude to unconscious social noise. This acceptance of the condition of hidden awakening opens space for more creative and sustainable ways of living this reality. Instead of constantly fighting isolation or trying to force connections in unsuitable environments, the awakened can focus their energy on cultivating internal and external spaces where their consciousness can flourish naturally. They can seek out or create smaller, more intimate communities where authenticity is valued, develop forms of artistic or intellectual expression that communicate their worldview in indirect ways, and find vocations that allow them to contribute positively to the world without requiring compromises with values that contradict their deepest understanding. The hidden awakening can also become a master of the art of subtle influence. Understanding that changes in consciousness rarely happen through direct confrontation or logical argumentation, it can develop more refined ways of sowing questions, inspiring reflection, and modeling alternative possibilities of being and living. This influence can happen through seemingly casual conversations that plant seeds of doubt in rigid certainties, through personal examples that demonstrate different ways of responding to life situations, through artistic creations that open windows to expanded perceptions of reality. Acceptance of the condition of concealment also allows for a more mature relationship with the desire for recognition and validation. Every human being carries a natural need to be seen and understood in their authenticity, but the awakening gradually learns that this validation can come from sources much more subtle and profound than conventional social approval. Connection with nature, with art, with profound spiritual texts, with one's own inner self, can provide forms of recognition that are more nourishing and sustainable than any form of social popularity. There is also a gradual discovery that the most important validation comes from one's own alignment with perceived truth. When a person lives according to their deepest understanding of reality, when their actions flow from their inner wisdom, when their life expresses their essential authenticity, a form of satisfaction arises that is independent of external recognition. This inner satisfaction becomes a more reliable compass than any social feedback for guiding life choices and directions. The hidden awakening also develops a special sensitivity to recognize the rare moments when it can emerge more fully from its concealment. There are specific situations, particular encounters, moments of collective or individual crisis, where your expanded perspective may be not only welcome but urgently needed. Wisdom consists in recognizing these moments and responding to them with courage and generosity, offering your understanding when it can be truly helpful. These moments of temporary emergence from concealment can be deeply nourishing and rewarding. They offer glimpses of what it would be like to live in a world where awakening was valued, where depth was preferred to superficiality, where authenticity was more important than conformity. Although these moments are typically brief, they sustain hope and renew commitment to the journey of expanded consciousness. The experience of living as a hidden awakening also teaches about the non-linear nature of spiritual growth. Unlike the models of progress that dominate other aspects of life, awakening does not follow a steady, predictable trajectory of development. There are periods of expansion followed by moments of apparent contraction, phases of clarity alternating with times of confusion, times of deep connection interspersed with seasons of intense loneliness. This non-linearity can be disconcerting to minds trained to expect measurable and steady progress, but it gradually reveals a deeper wisdom about the natural rhythms of conscious transformation. Just as the natural seasons have their own timing and purposes, the inner cycles of awakening have their own organic logic that transcends rational expectations of development. Acceptance of these natural rhythms frees awakening from the spiritual anxiety that can arise when transformation does not happen according to mental timetables. There is a growing understanding that each phase has its value, that even periods of apparent stagnation or regression serve important purposes in the larger process of consciousness evolution. The concealment of the awakened also serves an ecological function in the larger ecosystem of human consciousness. Just as in natural ecosystems there are species that live in the shadows, performing essential but rarely visible functions, Hidden awakenings keep alive evolutionary potentials that can be crucial in times of collective transition. Their silent presence preserves alternative possibilities of perception and understanding that can become vital when conventional structures of meaning collapse. This ecological perspective on hidden awakening reveals that there is nothing tragic or wasted in this condition. Every awakening, even if seemingly isolated and unproductive according to conventional social criteria, is fulfilling an important function in the greater evolution of human consciousness. Its mere existence keeps open the possibility that others may also awaken. Its presence in the world is a silent reminder that alternatives to collective unconsciousness are possible. At the end of this profound reflection on the condition of the hidden awakened ones in our time, a paradoxical understanding emerges. Apparent isolation may actually be a profound form of connection with more subtle aspects of existence. Hiding can be a preservation strategy that keeps the flame of expanded consciousness alive until more favorable conditions allow for its fuller expression. Loneliness can be a sacred space where the soul finds the nourishment that the social world cannot offer. And the feeling of not belonging may ultimately be a sign that you belong to a reality vaster and deeper than any conventional social structure could contain. Your journey of awakening, even if lonely and misunderstood, is a valuable contribution to the evolution of human consciousness. A seed of possibility planted in the soil of the future, a silent but powerful testimony that there are more authentic and meaningful ways to live in this mysterious and challenging world.